This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the February 14th edition of the DRF Players Podcast, the Valentine's Day edition, also known as Show 212, those happy numbers. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you, joined by the usual crew. We have from the DRF offices in New York, Mike Hogan. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Pete?
I was getting worried about the technical difficulties there. First, I thought we wouldn't have a show at all, and then I was getting worried I might have to sing the theme song. So thank you for your perseverance and the fact that that came through. We have with us also back in his home planet of Texas, Jonathon Kinchen. JK, what's the story?
Oh, what's going on, fellas? Yeah, I was watching Jimmy Fallon last night, and he made me laugh because he said Valentine's Day. The day that a lot of men in the world say, "Oh, I thought we weren't doing anything for each other."
It's about the size of it, I think.
I thought you were going to talk about how he and Magic Johnson were both talking about how they owned racehorses for a minute. Did you see that part?
I didn't. I was a little sad about that. They said they were never gonna do that again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I encountered Fallon many years ago in the clubhouse at Saratoga. I guess he went to the College of St. Rose, I think it's called, up near Albany, and they were doing a benefit there. And, so we struck up a conversation, as one does, about who we liked in the double. I didn't get the impression that he was a accomplished handicapper or horse player, but he did seem into it and was wagering. I can't claim to have given him any winners, but I was sort of encouraged to see him there and thought he might be a closet racing person, but it sounds like if that wasn't
his story was pretty funny.
No,
he said he asked Magic Johnson if he's ever had a bad investment, and Magic Johnson said, "Yeah, a racehorse." And Jimmy Fallon's like, "Oh, me too." and Magic Johnson, actually extremely funny, he said that they convinced him to buy the horse because he was running really fast by himself, but then when he got around running against other horses, he wasn't so fast. And then Jimmy Fallon said that he thought when he bought the horse, he was going to be able to name the horse. And so he's really excited about that. And then he found out the horse already had a name and he couldn't change it. And the horse's name was Poco Bueno. And he was like, which means a little bit good.
Little good.
Yeah, little good. So it was funny. Really
he's the funny thing is he's actually told that story on the Tonight Show before, because I remember him telling it a few months ago. I pulled up the lifetime PPs of Poco Bueno, or I pulled up the chart because I don't think he owned, and it was under an ownership name. I don't think he owned the horse for very long. I pulled up the race in question and actually tweeted it at him, but he didn't respond.
What was the situation? Did Poco Bueno live up to his name, Mike?
Pretty much. I think he ran 7th in an 8-horse field and was never a factor. And
Who
it was
trained?
like I don't know. I'll have to do a little digging. Maybe
Let's
maybe
revisit.
I can find that. Yeah.
Someone should have told Fallon he was on a dead rail, and that's the only reason he ran it.
If he'd stuck around a little bit longer, Poco Bueno could have become Muy Bueno. Who knows?
Actually, I'm pulling it up right now. He was a Grand Slam gelding. He ended up racing 25 times in his career, had 6 wins. I think he was trained by Gary Contessa to begin with, and then shortly afterwards moved to some other barns and ended up toiling at the bottom level. But yeah, no response when roused is the small comment for his debut.
We'll have to ask Gary Kahn when we see him up at Saratoga. He's been known to pop his head in the paddock bar area from time to time, and we'll see what Jimmy Fallon was like as an owner. That could be pretty entertaining stuff. That's a fun little rabbit hole to go down on this Valentine's Day show. I feel like we should do something special for Valentine's. Prepare, gentlemen. I won't put you on the spot right now, but prepare during the course of the show today. At the end, for your final thought, I'm going to ask you who you're sending your horse racing Valentine to. So while somebody else is thinking, I'll have time to think of it as well. We can send our Valentines at the end of the show. But first, I want to bring in a very special guest. First time on the DRF Players Podcast. He is Zeus.
Release the Kraken.
We play Liam Mason saying release the Kraken, of course, in honor of McCraken. In my dreams, that was then going to be accompanied by Richard Grunder calling the horse home. We didn't have time to put that together with the other issues that we had today, but, that's how these things go. McCraken made his return to the races, and it was a winning one. And it was, visually speaking, I thought pretty impressive for a horse who I think we all thought, while he was one of the obvious likely win candidates, had absolute license to be short under the Ian Wilkes training program. Clearly the goal, Churchill Downs on the first Saturday in May. I'll put it to you, gentlemen. We'll start with you, Mike. What did you think of McCraken's performance? Is he the real deal?
I think he's good. He was very good, and I liked him coming into the race. I actually tweeted out right after Classic Empire lost to Irish War Cry in the Holy Bull that Todd Pletcher had made a mistake by scratching fact finding and sending him to Tampa to run against McCraken. But you're right. On the podcast, I thought if there was a time to beat him, it was this time. But boy, he certainly was the best in that field. I know I saw some people online trying to make a case that Tappert actually ran the better race, but I don't agree. And I don't see why McCraken doesn't move forward off the effort.
Tappert certainly ran well with trouble, I thought, but I don't see how personally you'd want to take anyone other than McCraken out of the race. That type of move he made, it seems like the McCraken move, that's a move that often plays well on the first Saturday in May. What did you think, JK? Is this a serious Derby contender?
Yeah, I think we'll talk a little bit later about how I feel about getting excited at this point about a Derby horse. But here's what I'll tell you is that he ran well. I mean, I didn't think he was going to run well considering the situation that you mentioned. An undefeated horse for Ian Wilkes doesn't feel like they're going to, be cranked up to win the Sam F. Davis when you have a horse who's first or second in the future pools for the Derby. And so when a horse runs through what I would consider a lighter load or expectation in terms of training, it's always a positive note and something to consider moving forward.
Yeah, I can't see how he doesn't train on. I was speaking with our pal Mike Maloney yesterday, and he made the point about McCraken reminding him a little bit of Street Sense. The commonality there being that Street Sense, of course, trained by Ian Wilkes' mentor, Carl Nafsker, and he thought that a similar training program might be in the offing. And indeed, I think with Street Sense, he actually didn't start his 3-year-old year until the Tampa Bay Derby, and then just had the one race in the Bluegrass before going on to run in the Kentucky Derby. I wonder, are we going to see a similar plan with McCraken? Maybe, obviously, I think probably not Tampa. Maybe go straight from this to the Bluegrass and then the Derby. What have you heard anything, Mike? What would you do?
I haven't heard anything, and it's funny that you mentioned that, or it's funny that Mike Maloney mentioned that because it sounds like I'm in good company, and because I was almost going to mention Street Sense if you hadn't. It does feel a little bit similar. You're right. He made his 3-year-old debut in the Tampa Derby, barely beating any given Saturday, and then lost by a nose to Dominican in the Bluegrass. But that, of course, set it up for a huge run in the Kentucky Derby. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see the exact same path for McCraken.
Mike reminded me that he was very carefully handled, shall we say, in the Bluegrass that day, and actually then went on to re-break and gallop out past Dominican. It was basically a perfect setup race on the synth back then. Right. At Keeneland to set him up for the first Saturday in May. Be very interesting to see what happens with McCraken going forward. Let's talk about the Tappert trip. Seen a lot of chatter one way or the other. Oh, a chance for some errata here too, because I had mentioned that last week that somebody had made a comment about watching horses, learning more from watching horses than looking at pedigrees or something along those lines. That was actually a tweet from my friend Emily Gullickson. I just wanted to give her credit for mentioning that. She had made another mention this week on Twitter about maybe Tappert's trouble being overblown. I thought it was real trouble. I think she agreed it was real trouble. I think she was just more objecting to what Mike was saying. There were people out there saying that the horse ran better than the winner. I'm sort of with Mike and Emily thinking that's a little wacky. But yeah. What do you think, Jonathan? What was your take on the Tappert trick?
Well, I mean, look, I think that there was trouble, but and he has a similar a similar, at least coming into the race, he was similarly coming off kind of a break like McCraken was. But the thing is it's Todd, right? I mean, Todd is known for having horses ready to run early. It's not like you don't usually say like, oh, Todd's going to improve second out. I mean, Todd is when he brings them out there, they're supposed to run. Ian Wilkes, on the other hand, you would feel, especially with an accomplished horse, that he would kind of take his time. So moving forward, I want the horse who I feel has more training upside, more upside to kind of get to the bottom of him. And so, trouble or no trouble, McCraken's the one I want out of that. And to be honest, Tappert was kind of my pick. For the most part, I was touting him around when people asked me what I thought about the race. I said I think the other Todd's going to run well, and so I was completely trying to beat McCraken. And so when a horse beats me, I pay attention to it, especially when they overcome the reasons that I thought I was going to beat them.
Did either of you gentlemen see any excuse for no dozing? I certainly did not.
Oh, that was disappointing. No. Especially, he's been on my list of horses to watch based off of his last two races for a while now, and there was just nothing there, and so that was a pretty disappointing run.
Anything else for you on the Sam Davis, Mike Hogan?
Well, I took a shot with Wild Shot. I liked him coming into the race, and I thought he ran pretty well, getting floated wide and, hanging on pretty well for fourth. It's just like McCraken making his first start of a 3-year-old year. I don't see any reason why he couldn't move forward. I don't think he's as good, at least not right now, as McCraken is, and I don't know if he's a player on the Derby trail, but I think he's a nice horse, and I think he ran better than it looks on paper.
All right, Jonathan, you mentioned about having no dozing on your horse to watch list for a while. Unlike many people who tweet about and write about and talk about horse racing, the three of us are not what you would call, we're horse watch list guys. We're not Derby list guys. I wanted to just talk about the concept of the Derby list. It seems, almost dominant at times in your social media coverage of horse racing this time of year. I love talking racing. I love looking for performances of horses who might want to improve, but I prefer to look at it for me with the iris of the lens a little bit more open, I guess you'd say, taking in more light and looking beyond just trying to come up with a list for one race. Before I just opine on this, though, it seemed like you had something to say on this topic, Jonathan. Why don't you make a Derby list?
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. We've all probably done it because we've been asked to do it. And so you kind of, there's been times where I've done it. It's like the hardest thing in the world to do. Here's what I learned a long time ago, or maybe not a long time ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, is that I was consistently falling in love with horses based on their mile and a 16th performances. And then when they got beat at a mile and an eighth, I would make excuses for them and then want them back in the Derby. Or when they would barely win or have setups at a mile and an eighth, I would say, oh, I was right. For instance, Sydney's Candy. Okay, I liked Sydney's Candy. He wanted a mile and an eighth, crawling on the lead, and I thought for some reason he was going to get a mile and a quarter. That was wrong. I fell in love with Verrazano on some of the things that Verrazano did, and he had a kind of favorable setup to win a mile and an eighth race, and then he let me down. So what I've decided to start doing is I just play those races as individual events, and I reserve all Derby conversations until after I see them run at a mile and an eighth. And that way I don't fall in love with something early, and then it drags me along into the first Saturday in May, and then I have to take that terrible, terrible walk home from Churchill Downs as a loser.
You don't have the golf cart and the rubber bands on those Saturdays in May, do you?
No, there's to be honest with you, I joke, but I've literally only won one Derby. I said right? Literally. I said literally, and I told myself I was going to work on that. I
was going to let you have one. If you did it twice, I was going to get you. But once
I've
I was
only
won. Let it go, just so you know.
I've only won one Derby. And to be honest, every Kentucky Derby day that I've been to, except for that one, the American Pharoah one, which was the opposite of this, resulted at some point in an ATM trip.
Wow. That's trouble. That's the opposite of what you want. You don't want to be dealing with that walk of shame on Derby Day. To be fair though, Jonathan, you did also have Giacomo.
Well, I did, but I had, I also was in college and a lot of keg beer and the system at the time. So
a few years between drinks.
But every year being at the Derby, I've lost, except for the American Pharoah year.
Mike, what's your attitude about these Derby lists?
I'm kind of the same way, and there's horses that I'm interested in following, but I don't put it all on the one race because so much can happen in the Derby. It's 19 other horses. Everybody makes a lot about this is the first time and maybe the only time they'll go this far. It's also the only time they'll face 19 horses in a race, or even if there's a scratches, 17 or 18. Trips really do matter in the Derby. You can't get stopped and win the Derby. It just doesn't happen because there are too many other good horses in there. So I try not to put all my eggs in one basket. If there's a horse that I like, I don't key it all around the Derby. And even a horse like No Dozing, who I wasn't completely all in on prior to the race, but you can make some excuses for a horse like that if you were very high on him going into the race. I mean, it was his first start of a 3-year-old year. Maybe he didn't like the Tampa surface. He'd never raced there before. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater just after one bad race, because I think all horses are allowed that if they've got talent.
I suppose that's a fair comment. For me, also, another key point about the Derby list, I'll leave it to the professionals. I don't need to take the effort to do that kind of digging on my own. DRF every year, Jay Priven, Mike Watchmaker, they put together their contenders list. If I'm interested in sort of, hey, what's going on with the Derby now, I'll look at what those guys have to say and focus my energy on actually, studying form and trying to make bets with the chance of getting myself paid. I just wanted to cover that topic briefly, at least. Before we leave Tampa entirely, we saw the return to the races of Elate on Saturday as well. Not the winning return to the races that many had anticipated off that maiden romp at Aqueduct back in November. JK, are you feeling negative about Elate at this point, or do you expect her to bounce back? I mean, this is one who folks were talking about, like potentially the East Coast answer to Unique Bella coming into the race. What do you think coming out of it?
Yeah, no offense to anyone who placed a wager on Elate, but I think it's like one of those deals when you look at it, retroactively, you say to yourself, okay, so it's Bill Mott off a long break with a talented filly, and she didn't run well first off. It's like, of course she didn't run well first out, but he's not the type of guy, just like we talked about earlier, that's going to have him just ready to rock and roll at Tampa for the Suncoast. He's more of a down-the-line guy, a slow progressor, and I would assume that she'll find her form moving forward. It just didn't feel like the Suncoast was probably her best foot forward.
I didn't think it was a terrible race. It just wasn't what folks were expecting.
But it's not what you expect when she's 30 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mike Hogan, what did you think?
Well, I thought that Jose Ortiz rode her like he was riding Secretariat. He didn't care about losing ground. He didn't care about where he was early. He thought, no matter what, I got the best horse in the race, and I'm going to ride her as such. And for a horse just making her second career start, trying to run down a horse who could very well be pretty good in her own right and has a relatively easy lead, you got to be a super horse to be able to win under those situations. And the other thing I'll mention is, Let's think back to one we mentioned just last week on the podcast because of the passing of Royal Delta. In some ways, you could make the analogy to the way Elate ran and actually ran quite a bit better in the Suncoast than Royal Delta did, making her 3-year-old debut at a very short price in her second career start.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. Royal Delta was a no-show. Something obviously went wrong in that race all those years ago. I don't know that anybody thinks Elate's going to be the next Royal Delta, but I do think she certainly, the bloom isn't completely off the rose for me in terms of her being one of the players in her division, if still clearly well behind the leader. I think that's safe to say.
Absolutely.
Let's keep it with some 3-year-old chatter. Mike made fun of me for wanting to even talk about this next race. You sent me something very smug, Mike. What was it? What did you text?
Well, prior to the pod, I asked who we were going to be talking about, thinking that we're going to be talking about all the big stakes races. And you mentioned some allowance and maiden winners that I hadn't even gone back and watched. I'd heard about the races, but I hadn't had a chance to watch every one of the replays. And so my comment was, I don't think the Derby winner is going to be debuting at Aqueduct in February.
And to me, it's a snobby thing to say because it also just ties into like what I'm trying to do here with horses I talk about. I'm not necessarily trying to give you the Derby winner with every 3-year-old race I want to talk about. I want to talk about horses who I see who have potential to win graded stakes. And that's what I saw, Derby or no, that's what I saw on a February Saturday at Aqueduct when I saw Cloud Computing run. I mean, this was a horse who the word was obviously out. The horse was absolutely hammered. And I would think that even people who liked the horse and had heard all the hype, when the gates opened and the horse broke, the ground broke from under the horse, would have been ready to trade their tickets for pennies on the dollar. The horse ends up making multiple moves in the race, running greenly pretty much throughout and still getting the job done against what was a very strong field, I thought, for this time of year in New York in a maiden race. I was super impressed. So Cloud Computing ends up getting, I think it was an 84 buyer in the end. It was originally reported as 83, but when I just went and checked in the system, it was listed as an 84. Very solid debut for Claremont and Chad Brown. Mike, when you watched the tape, what did you think?
I thought it was good, but I'm not sure I'm willing to anoint him as a future stakes winner off of that effort. He beat 4 horses. I'm not sure any one of them are.
Mineralogy's a good-looking horse.
Maybe. But he. Granted, I haven't
Jonathon,
watched all.
Settle an argument here. What did you think of Cloud Computing?
Oh, I think he'll definitely win a stakes race. And the reason I knew he ran well was when I watched. Okay, so I had a friend call me who knows someone in the Chad situation and said they like this horse a lot and they think that he'll win if he breaks. Well, he didn't break. So I was like, oh, now he's not going to win. I laughed a little bit. Then they go to turn for home. And as they turn for home, I say to myself, oh, he's just not going to get there. And then someone FaceTime calls me on my computer. So my video goes away. I answer the FaceTime call. I talk to the person for a second. They were out of the country. It was my friend Robert, who's out of the country. And so I talked to him for a second. And then my phone rings and goes, wow, that was impressive. And I'm like, what? So I watched the replay and I found out that he won when I thought there was no way he was winning when they turned for home after what he overcame. And so that's when I know they were good. The narrative of my life kind of confirmed to me that the horse is really good, and I think he will win a stakes race.
Not the only good-looking 3-year-old this weekend. There was another one from down in Florida you wanted to talk about, Jonathon.
Yeah, the Todd horse. We finally found our typical every year Todd horse that freaks at Gulfstream in back-to-back events and then shows up in a stakes race and is bet to 7-2, and you have to make some type of a decision if that's value or if it's not value. And so I would imagine that in the Fountain of Youth, if that's probably going to come up too quick, but maybe the Florida Derby, you'll be forced with that decision on whether this horse is the real deal or not.
You're talking about Malagacy, is that the horse's name?
Yeah, I was going to make you say it so that I didn't mispronounce it.
Won by 15 on debut in the wet, comes back and wins by 7, earning Beyer speed figures first time out 87, and then coming back to improve that to a 96. Mike Hogan, what's your gut here? Is this a legitimate player on the Triple Crown, or is this to I'll let you use your line about Todd Pletcher and Gulfstream.
Well, Todd Pletcher and Gulfstream, and it's funny, Jonathon, the way you were describing wins impressively at Gulfstream, shows up at 7-2 in a stakes race. You could have been talking about any one of 4 or 5 Todd Pletcher contenders this year. Fact Finding was one. This Battalion runner we haven't even mentioned, but a lot of people are really high on him after he won a week or 2 ago. I know they're talking stakes next for him. Now we've got Malagacy. I don't know. These are ones that historically I've liked to bet against, especially in the Derby. But the next prep, if it comes at Gulfstream for Todd Pletcher and Malagacy, he's got to be a player, right?
Yes, I was trying to set you up for what happens at Gulfstream stays at Gulfstream.
Well,
which I think you might. You said you might have. I was always giving you credit for it, and then you admitted one day that you might have been accidentally plagiarizing it from somebody else. But I still think it's a great line that I give to you.
Oh, thank you. It's not exactly the most original line in the world, but I'll take credit if you want.
But I like it because for better or worse, it seems like there's some truth in it every year with these 3-year-olds who emerge running these type of gaudy figures in their first couple of starts. But who knows? I mean, the other thing about a guy like Pletcher is would it really surprise me that much if a trainer that good with that record of success were to tweak his program one of these years and find a way to get some of these horses peaking later or trading on a little bit more. I mean, personally, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I know what the numbers say with his horses in the Derby at this point, but I'm not willing to just make a line in the sand and say I'm not betting any of his horses. I mean, where are you, Mike, with Pletcher for Triple Crown prospects?
Well, I think that's absolutely what he's been trying to do, and I think he's been trying to do it for a few years. We saw it with Stradivari; it just happened a little too late, and he made the Preakness, and everyone was on. Seemed like everyone and their brother was on him to win that race. He tried it with Destin and Outwork last year. These horses that had foundational races as 2-year-olds, and then a long break before the Triple Crown Trail. And there's another one I'm going to try and take a look and see if I can remember. There's another one who debuted at Saratoga. Jonathan, are you rattling papers or something, man?
I don't think so. Is it bad?
Yeah, a little bit.
My bad.
It's cool. But anyway, he had one that debuted at Saratoga over the summer. It took a long break and came back and won impressively at Tampa a week or two ago. I'm sure we'll see that one on the Triple Crown Trail. It does seem like he's trying now to do something a little different so that they don't all burn out by March or April of the 3-year-old year.
What do you think about Pletcher's prospects for the Triple Crown this year and beyond, JK? Are you at a point where you hold his past record against him, or do you think it's just one of those things and when he has the right horse, he'll have success commensurate with his level of success at other places?
No, I mean, I think there's probably something to it, right? I mean, there obviously is with that type of record, but I also think that it's, partly just a little bit unlucky, and I think that he'll probably just gets the right horse and he'll find the right horse and he'll win one. I would think that Todd Pletcher has a Triple Crown at some point before he retires.
A whole Triple Crown or a Triple Crown race?
No, I think he'll win a Triple Crown before the whole thing retires. You just got to get the right horse. People said the same.
Stuff.
People said a lot of the same things about. A lot of people said the same thing about Baffert being hard on horses, and he's it's you make it through one of his programs and you're a good horse, and because they have so many good ones that it's kind of the cream rises to the crop, and so I think Pletcher. A lot of people say the same thing about Pletcher. They said about Baffert, and look what Baffert's done. He won a Triple Crown, and he's got the best horse in training. And probably the best horse we've seen in the last 10 years in Arrogate.
When I was watching some tape of another 3-year-old over the weekend, I briefly thought I was watching a Bob Baffert runner because of the familiar Kaleem Shah silks. And then I remembered this is 2017, and he don't train for Kaleem Shah anymore. And it was a Doug O'Neill runner out in, I think it was the San Vicente in California. Iliad, the colt with the Homeric name, earning a 96 Beyer speed figure and looking pretty good on that tape. What was your take on this runner, JK? Another one to arrive on the scene that's going to take some beating going forward, or a flash in the pan?
Oh, I thought he ran well, and for a trainer who got the roses on the first Saturday in May, starting his horse in this race as well, the 7 furlong San Vicente, and I actually heard. What's my guy's name? Why am I going blank now? The guy that's on Bic that wrote for the Blood Horse Forever, Haskins.
Steve Haskin?
Was talking about how in the past so many great Derby winners had started at 7 furlongs and worked their way up, and it hasn't been something that's happened as much as of recent. So there could be something there, and obviously whoever buys horses for the Shaws does a really good job because they seem to have a good one every year, and so this one could be special.
What did you think, Mike? Did you get a chance to check that one out?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was a good performance. It remains to be seen against better horses. I don't think that was Bob Baffert's best runner out in Southern California against the likes of the Masteries and the American Anthems and even a couple of the others that are maybe just maiden winners for Bob Baffert. I'm not sure Iliad is one that I want to anoint as the next Nyquist, but he sure did look good.
Yeah, definitely one to keep an eye on going forward. I figure it's just a good idea to signpost some of these 3-year-old performances throughout the spring. Eventually we'll get to, I guess, our version of the Derby list is when we do our game that we've done the last couple of years, where we sort of draw lots and draft the Derby team. And of course, last year we had the fantastic three-way tie for last with Kinchen even further back than that. Hopefully we'll do a little bit better this time around. But when do we do that usually, Mike?
Oh, I don't know. I guess we would do it right after the last prep, right?
I feel like we did it before the sort of last prep. We'll have to go back. We can look and see at what the shows are. It's maybe a little more fun to do it with a little bit more uncertainty before those last preps are fun. Do you remember this, JK, from last year, or did you block out the whole incident?
Well, I do remember, but I was a little cheeky. I think I picked Stradivari and somebody else. I was almost right, but I just backfired on it.
You did get very cute.
Yeah.
You did. I remember on your team you had several runners that weren't even running in the Kentucky Derby, but I saw where you were going with it at the time. But so yeah, if you pick Stradivari, it was after. We'll look it up and we'll get the info.
Stradivari debuted at the Keeneland tournament, so in April is when he debuted.
Okay, so it had to be post Bluegrass, post that final round of preps. We'll see. We'll come up with something clever, hopefully half clever, to do for the Derby contest this year. We'll try to get Chris Larmy back in the mix as well. He was very fun and helpful. What's up, Mike?
The Todd horse that I was thinking of who won at Tampa on the 25th is named Always Dreaming, won by 11.5 lengths. Johnny V went to Tampa to ride that horse. The only amount he had that day, it was like a Thursday or something at Tampa. He made the trip special as a Bodemeister who sold for $350 at auction. And I bet you'll see him in a stakes next race.
All right, we'll be continuing to keep tabs on the 3-year-olds, Colts, and fillies as we get. We can start dreaming at least on the first Saturday in May, which sounds pretty good to me as I sit in a freezing cold car here on St. John's Place in Park Slope, and it looks like it could start snowing at any moment. I like the idea of thinking about roses and the first Saturday in May. Let's move on to talking about some of the other big races this weekend. You guys each had one you wanted to talk about. We'll start with the race that we talked about on the show, which was the Grade 1 Gulfstream Park Turf Handicap. Boy, a lot to say about this. Almanar was the winner. Beach Patrol, I thought, ran extremely well in defeat, attending a pace that was coded as red in the Timeform USPPs to both the 6 furlong and the mile, being right up on that pace, ending up getting DQ'd. Jonathan, let's just get to your general thoughts on this race. What did you see?
Well, I think that it was a pretty quality race, and I think that we'll probably see a number of those horses come out to win Grade 1s before the end of the year. I think Beach Patrol's got a Grade 1 with his name on it. Obviously, Almanar is a talented horse that will have another Grade 1 at some point throughout the year, and hopefully Devisadero. I think like we mentioned before, it's there's no knock on these riders. They go out and they risk their lives every day, but it feels like when you're dealing with a horse who typically is pace compromised in his races, at least his last two, he was too far back in a slow pace. This one I thought he was too close in a fast pace. I just wonder if having someone who is getting a leg up more than once or twice a day, and just having a feel for timing and what's going on, just kind of like a Kevin Durant showing up and not shooting during warm-ups. I don't imagine that it would go well. So I'm hoping that Edgar either gets a better handle on the horse moving forward, or maybe Buff will decide to kind of just maybe change it up just for luck, similar to what we saw. One of the biggest change-ups ever to me was Garrett Gomez having to come off of looking at Lucky like he could have done anything different in the Derby. Baffert just said, we're just going to try to change up luck. Martin goes on and wins the Preakness. So maybe similar to that, we could see something like that.
I'll tell you what, I don't know who Jonathan's going to award his Valentine to at the end of the show, but if Edgar Prado was thinking about sending his to Jonathan, he's going to cancel that. 2 shows in a row. knocking the old man. Now,
I think I'm allowed to because I have him tattooed on my arm. I'm allowed. Like you can call your brother fat, but no one else can. I think it's kind of the same thing. Like I can criticize. He's tattooed on my arm, for crying out loud. We're gonna be together. We're together forever. Yeah.
Maybe that gives you a license. Maybe he'll send you the Valentine and just write something nasty in it. Hey, I'll tell you this: watching the race live, Edgar did nothing to make me happy that I went out of my way to defend him on Friday's show. Okay, but looking back at the chart, even I'm assuming he's riding that race. I'm assuming he's thinking Beach Patrol's the horse to beat. Beach Patrol's in front of him. Beach Patrol's on that pace and runs so well anyway. Is there a way, Mike, you can defend the tactics given what Beach Patrol's tactics were and how he ended up in the race, or was this a case of tactical error?
I mean, I guess so. And maybe if he thought he had enough horse that it wouldn't matter. But yeah, I mean, it's one, if you asked him, he'd probably want to have that ride back and probably maybe afterwards went to Buff and said, give me another shot. I want to make good. I don't know. Sometimes jockeys make mistakes. We've seen it even with the best of them. I've seen many jockeys who are really good just make the wrong move, go for a hole that didn't exist, or take a horse way too wide because they overestimated or underestimated the competition. It happens.
We're giving short shrift to the winner, Almanar. JK, what'd you think of his run?
Thought he ran well. That same phone call that told me that Cloud Computing was going to win or would win if he broke. That phone call also said that the barn is really high on Almanar, and that the workout report didn't show it, but there might have been a work at some point in the last 6 to 7 weeks where they worked together. Almanar and Beach Patrol, and Almanar got the best of them. I still sided with Beach Patrol because I thought he possessed a tactical advantage. And so, but Almanar ran well. He ran well. Mike and I picked him. Go ahead and red board for a second. Mike and I both of us. If you red board for you and someone else, then it's not nearly as bad.
It's not as bad. It's true. It's not as obnoxious
because you're kind of patting them on the back too. But Mike and I picked that horse in the race before that he got nailed at the wire by Flatline. So it's good to see that. What did you expect from Chad? That he wasn't going to win a turf race down at Gulfstream
or anywhere for that matter. Here's an interesting thing, and I'll use it to plug. Are we calling it a webinar or a handicapping session on Thursday, Mike?
This is a webinar. This is a straight how to use Timeform.
We're doing a Timeform US webinar. I'm thrilled to have a guy who does not do interviews joining us, Mark Attenberg, Timeform US founder. I've known the man for 20 years. I used to work with his wife back in my publishing days, and we bonded immediately over being racing fans. And I met Mark that way and was thrilled to follow along when he started Timeform US. Even more thrilled when the partnership was announced between Daily Racing Form and Timeform US. And after talking about in various ways working with each other for 20 years, we actually finally were. Mark will be joining Mike and I to go over. We did the first webinar with Craig, and while I was really happy with the content, I think it was maybe for more of like a novice level or even above novice level player. We went into some pretty intense handicapping concepts. This is going to be more just like an introduction. If you've never seen Timeform, if you're looking to get a handle on the basics of how to use the PPs, what the different numbers are indicating, how to customize them, what else do you see us talking about?
Well, to be fair, Pete, I think the last one was the webinar you wanted to have, and this one is the webinar I need to have because you've been a Timeform US user for years.
Yes.
And you had a lot of specific questions for the creator of the speed figures that are in the pace figures in Timeform US, which is Craig. And I said, whoa. How do I even customize things? Where do I get to these features? How do I do this? I've used DRF for years. Show me why I should be using Timeform, and show me, you went like graduate school level. I needed the GED course first. So.
That's very funny. Well, you hung with us that day, and we're going to have a lot of fun on Thursday. That'll be at 11 o'clock. There should be a banner on the site, Mike, that folks can, if you just go to drf.com, will you see the way to sign up? We'll also be tweeting about it. Mike from @DRF Hogan, @DRF Formulator, and me from @LoomsBoldly. But the reason I sort of went on the tangent before I made the point I was going to make, getting back to the Gulfstream Park Turf Handicap, an interesting thing about the pace figures and the speed figures on there and the way that they interact, you can look at just raw speed figures, but the sort of main Timeform US performance figures are pace adjusted. And with that in mind, they actually had Beach Patrol, who ran a 123 on their numbers, and Almanar, the winner, running a 121. I just thought that was interesting. Jonathan, for you, does that reflect how you feel about these horses going forward?
No, absolutely. It always does. I mean, when, it's one of the things when I'm, and I don't recommend doing this, but it happens to the best of us, when you just, time gets up on you and you kind of quick capping through a race. One of the things I love to do at Timeform is just kind of blast through it. I look for those colors, and I look for horses that attended red or horses that closed into blue. If that doesn't make sense to you, then you jump on their site and kind of look at it. But the red is, like they said, fast. The blue is a slow pace. So I look for horses that were attended red or closed into blue, and then I look at the figure, and I just pick the one with the highest figure that has one of those common situations. And those are the horses that sometimes I'll pick when I'm in a hurry. So there's a lot to that. I agree.
Very similar for the formulator users who upload the racing flow data, similar principles to try to find upgrades and downgrades regarding the pace that you can do in Timeform US. We should talk about the DQ for at least 12 seconds. JK, you're a Beach Patrol guy. Was it justified taking him down?
I'll tell you what, one of the most underrated things in racing is when you're watching a DQ in the heat of the moment and you are financially involved, you can never see it objectively. You have to either not be involved in it, or you have to go back and watch it again. I was hoping he was going to stay up, but it made sense to me that he came down. There was contact. He did come in. I did think War Correspondent came out a little bit, but if someone was the offensive in that one, it was definitely Beach Patrol. It wasn't one of those that made me mad, like this made no sense, but he had to come down.
Mike Hogan, any dissent from you? You're more objective than JK on this issue.
No, yeah. I mean, I can see the case from both sides, but I think if you're following the letter of the law, it makes sense that they took him down and placed him fourth.
One more race to review before we get to some potentially some wagering discussion, if we have a minute at the end of the show. And we also have a question that I might want to deal with. But Mike, you wanted to talk about the Gulfstream Park Handicap. Sharp Azteca with a nice-looking push-button horse-type win that earned, it was something lofty. I think it was a 107.
Yeah,
107 buyer speed figure. What did you think of that return?
I think some have said, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, that looked like the performance of the weekend to me. As good as McCraken was, as good as some of these turf races were, that was a pretty monstrous performance. They're talking Dubai, Godolphin Mile for him next out. But I think he's a perfect cigar mile, Met Mile kind of horse. I don't think he wants to go 2 turns, or at least he's not at his best. And 7 furlongs to a mile is a perfect distance for a horse.
Are they still running the Met Mile in New York?
I think I don't know. Good question.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
I take it, Jonathan, you were not as impressed with Sharp Azteca, or just not as impressed with his trainer's ability to ship into New York? Where are you going with this?
No, I was very impressed. He's a racehorse. He's an absolute racehorse. He proved that on Derby Day. I'm not 100% sure, but someone can memory check me on this. I would believe that he set fractions that were red in the Pat Day Mile on Derby Day, which helped me to realize that he was a good horse. But
yes.
He's a legit horse, and yes, if he shows up in the Met Mile, I would need Jorge Navarro's stats to do a little bit better in New York than he's done. But I'm also going to need Stellar Wind and John Sadler to do a little bit better outside of California if I'm going to bet her. I'm not picking on Jorge, so right. It's just a geographical thing we've talked about before. I want to see a trainer have the same type of success even when he has to get on the plane.
Sometimes it just takes time. I mean, you see it seems like year in, year out, you'll see Kentucky outfits come to New York for the first time, especially during Saratoga, and underperform. And even an operation as successful as Steve Asmussen, I'd have to look up the specifics, but I remember his first year in Saratoga, I mean, getting next to nothing with a lot of starters. And then, of course, you know, they figure out whatever it is they have to figure out to get the program working in the new place and get their horses in a routine and get the right staff in place. Whatever the factors are, they can eventually figure it out. We'll see if that's what it is with that could certainly be the case with somebody like Navarro. But I agree, no matter what the operation is, it's nice to see that success out of the home. You know, it's like a sports team with road games and home games, right? Some teams play a lot better at home, and it's hard to take the show on the road. And then when they get good enough, eventually that success tends to translate.
Let me ask you guys this: is it just Navarro in New York, or is it Navarro shipping in general? Because if it's the latter, you could make a case that he's actually been relatively successful recently doing so. XY Jet ran a huge race, just missing in Dubai last year, and the Malibu for Sharp Azteca was very, very good, probably his best career race prior to the Gulfstream Handicap. So
I think there are some things that are unique about New York for a trainer like Navarro that might be an issue. So I would consider New York separately. I mean, we saw what he did on Derby Day last year. It seems obvious he's able to point for races on big days and do well in those. But
right. No, I think Go ahead. No, sorry, Pete. I thought you were done.
Go ahead.
We've just mentioned him winning in 5 different jurisdictions. So I don't think it's just him getting on the plane, like you mentioned. I think it's something specific to New York.
Yeah. Okay. But I think those are related handicapping issues when you're looking at it's just something to look for, I think, in your handicapping in general, especially if you're looking to try to beat horses who are going to be short. If you can find some sort of reason to bet against short price horses, and you know the operation hasn't had success in a certain place. Sometimes it might be over multiple jurisdictions, like I was saying in my home game, road game analogy. Sometimes there might be something specific, especially in a place like New York. So
right, but
my thought on that.
But I want to be clear. I mean, it's not just Jorge, right? I mean, Kieran, I don't think does well in California. You know, Bob does well in New York. There's a lot. You know, Sadler, I don't know if he's won a race when he's had to get on a plane ever. You know what I mean?
You're not bringing up the tire thing that Baffert doesn't do well in New York again, are you?
No, I'm saying he does. I think he does do well in New York.
Yeah, he does, absolutely.
I mean, I'm thinking about all the
big
horses.
Never mind.
Yeah, the big horses he shipped there.
That was a talking point for 12 seconds last summer about, you know, there was some low sample size, meaningless stat about him underperforming in Saratoga, and then he went and won everything, you know.
Until he came and won both grade ones.
Yeah, exactly.
The two biggest 3-year-old grade ones.
Put the lie to that one.
So let's dig a little deeper. He's won 4 times in the last 5 years in New York, twice with Private Zone, and then once with a horse named Angel Code, and another one with Depeche Chat, who was a nice, decent little turfer. He's also finished second by a neck a couple times, once at 12-1. You know, and sure, he's disappointed a little bit with Private Zone in the Met Mile, maybe most notably, but he's also, you know, Catalina Red ran a pretty good third at some relatively big odds for him. So I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of still small-ish sample size stuff. And I don't know if it's enough necessarily to look. If you're looking for something to bet against him at a short price, go ahead. But if he's going to be 3rd or 4th choice or 2nd choice even, and he's got controlling speed and he's got huge figures, I don't see it as a huge negative personally.
All right, let's move on. Let's get back to some wagering discussion. We sort of ran out of time. Folks seem to enjoy when we were talking about that great tale from the track that we had submitted that we read. The next point I wanted to make, for folks who didn't know, is the idea was you have it's not even important that this horse was like a crazy outsized price that it probably should have been bet to win. The horse in the story was 60-1. But to me, any horse that's your sort of bet of the day horse that's value, to me, it's very logical that you're going to want to allocate a significant part of your overall play on said horse in the win pool to keep from a situation where your best bet of the day whose value wins and you get nothing. For me, as part of my betting personality, that's not something that makes me feel good. I'm not going to feel as good about going home that night and putting in trip notes and doing my handicapping for the next day. That's the kind of thing that's going to get me down. It's going to put me off my game. I need that. I need that. And another way that I would express it is, to me, if you're taking a horse like that, let's take this theoretical, we even just call him a 6-1 shot. And if you bet that horse, if you don't bet that horse to win, and that horse is alone, like a single, and when I say single, I'm not talking about the only A horse in the race. Jonathan, I've heard you sometimes say, oh, I'm singling him when he's your lone A horse. That's not what single means. Single means that's your only horse. And to me, if you make your key horse bet of the day just a single in the multis, you're taking a win bet and you're making it really freaking complicated. And I'm not too interested in that. The way that you do it, JK, or I've seen you do it, where you'll have that horse as an A in multis, but you'll also have backups, like that, to me makes perfect sense and is a lot smarter. It's the rare horse in a pick 5. I mean, it does certainly happen, but for me to single in those spots, that's more the thing I'm going to do typically with something that's a little bit shorter. I guess when I have a key horse who I know is value, I want to take out as much risk around that horse as it is possible. JK, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I was thinking back, and I have a baseball analogy that I'll get to, but here's my example. And I don't know, Pete, you've been around me enough to maybe you can remember one. I can remember like my bets of the day and bets of my life, and Devisadero was one of them. And I almost did it again. I did not bet him to win. I hit the try. I hit the infamous $300 pick 3. I hit the start of the pick 6. I hit a million things, but I did not bet the horse to win. Another example of that is this summer at Del Mar, there was a horse that was 20-1 that and I don't ever normally do this. I don't know why I did it. I singled in the pick 6 and the horse won, and I missed the pick 6 and got absolutely nothing from it. And I'm okay with that. It's stupid and I shouldn't be, but I'm okay with that. And here's my handicapping personality and this is going to sound weird, but I am not interested in hitting home runs. What I want to do is I believe in my ability to hit a heck of a lot of base hits, and I'm going to just keep moving. And what I mean by that is, like, if I like a horse that's 12-1 in the third leg, then I'm saying that I'm going to hit a base hit in the first leg, a base hit in the second leg, a base hit in the third leg, and a base hit in the fourth leg, and I'm going to score 4 runs. You know what I mean? Like, rather than trying to, like, I know that it seems like I'm trying to just hit it out of the park. But really, my handicapping personality is one of consistency. That I believe in my ability to pick 4 winners in a row, and to work around a really good opinion and maximize that 6-1 or 7-1 shot in a multi-race pool where I think you can get more value.
Mike, where do you weigh in on this topic?
Well, let's go back to the Devisadero comment for a second, because, Jonathan, here's why I, just like you, would not have put a win bet on Devisadero if I were in your situation. On Derby Day, you were alive. You had a cold pick 3 ending in Devisadero, going from competitive edge through Dame Dorothy.
Just so you know, it ended in Dame Dorothy, but it's not going to change your argument. But just so you know.
Fair enough. So what I often will do is try to get alive in a multi-race wager with a horse that I really like and I'm afraid is going to get bet down, because I think Devisadero was 12-1 morning line, got bet down a little bit, but we all knew he was not going to be that in the win pool. So you're trying to lock in some value in the multi-races by singling him in the last leg. And if you're alive, it could be a double, could be a pick 3, could be pick 4, could be whatever. But if you're alive to that horse for X amount, you don't need to put a win bet in, because you've basically already got a win bet on it, right? Sure,
that's a different type of
absolutely.
I'm talking about how you'd allocate your money at the beginning of the day. And for me, it worked out great that Derby day, but I mean, would it have killed you to have, at the beginning? Maybe you don't do it eventually, but to me, I would have had in my mind $100 or whatever set aside to bet that horse on the nose at the beginning of the day. If you're alive in some big pick, yeah, maybe you zig instead of zag, but
right, and that's what I'm saying is I will often, this is my strategy, I will often try to get alive and I'll set aside some of my money, $30, say, starting the pick two races prior to get alive, and then if for whatever reason I'm knocked out and not singled, then I've set aside some money to bet win or exact or on the race itself. Otherwise, I sometimes will, if I'm getting enough of a payoff, because I can see the will pays, I just let it ride. But the other thing I'll say, and this is another analogy I'll use, when you have a horse that you really, really love to the point where you want to single, like Pete, like you're saying, not just lone A, but single, you want to make your day go through. Okay, if you're not alive to the horse in those multi-race wagers, if you're not putting any win money on it, you're basically, it's like the equivalent of splitting tens at blackjack. You're taking an opinion where you think is very, very strong and a very likely winner, but you're trying to get too cute in order to make more money, when really what you do is you lower your own odds of cashing.
All right, there's more to talk about on this. We might have to make it a regular segment for this winter, but I do want to get to these Valentines, and we are just about out of time. I will go first. My horse racing Valentine, I'm going to send this one out to DRF's Todd Unger. He's going to be, you guys know him. You hear him every week if you're a listener to the podcast, because he also doubles in addition to being one of the muckety mucks in the upper echelons of DRF for the past several years. He's also a voiceover artist, and he does the voiceover at the beginning of our show. Been a terrific supporter of mine and a great ally and a real pleasure to work with for these last 3.5 years. Going to be going on to greener pastures. Just want to say to Todd, happy Valentine's Day. Mike Hogan, what you got?
You stole my thunder. It's okay though. It's okay. Todd
that was
hired
what you were
me.
gonna do.
Well, it's okay. I got another one. It's okay. but you're right. I mean, I owe my job here to Todd. He hired me. He's been my boss, and he'll be absolutely missed. But I wish him nothing but the best. My Valentine is going to be to Mr. Craig Milkowski in the level of work that he does in hand timing races and watching races. So many of these things that we're now discussing about the timing of the Pegasus, the timing of things, run up. Oh, it's buyer first, and it's the figure makers that are taking that level of effort and really making us all smarter. So that's my Valentine. Thanks,
I'm so
Craig.
glad guys like Andy Beyer and Craig do the work they do, so we don't have to.
Exactly.
JK.
Yes. Mine is I'm not a faithful person. I've got two Valentines, so mine are you two guys. Mike for no, I'm serious.
Oh, what a love fest this pod turned into.
No, but I'm serious. When I met Mike at the NHC a few years ago, like a lot of people, I didn't know who Mike was. I just knew that he was DRF formulator, but I didn't know who he was. And when I had a chance to meet him, I was excited and it was fun. And from that day forward, he's always been nice to me, and he's always treated me like I was kind of part of the team, even when I was just kind of guest appearing on the show. And so, and he also is very nice when I text him and ask him to do annoying DRF back end. How many turf races has Talamo won? He's always obliged to that. So I thank him for that. And then Pete, of course, I think it sometimes shocks people that Pete and I think people think Pete writes the stories he's written about me because of our friendship, but Pete's been he's been great for me in my life. He's also been very helpful professionally, but even personally, whenever I've had some stuff going on, I can call Pete and chat with him about it. So he's my horse racing Valentine as well. So I appreciate you two guys and making me feel welcome on this fun podcast and kind of giving me a home to talk about racing a couple times a week for the last year or so.
It is a well-known fact, Jonathan, that I plucked you from obscurity. So I do appreciate the kind words. And that's all the time we have on this week's show. I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen, especially for that very nice Valentine, in all seriousness. I want to thank Mike Hogan Great job of persisting through the technical difficulties and getting the show on the air. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening, sending your comments. Had some questions we didn't get to. We'll move those to Friday. If you have more, hit us up at podcast@drf.com. We will be back on Friday at 11. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.